You know that feeling when a story grabs you so hard you forget to blink? That's why we're here. This channel is for people who are hopelessly and helplessly addicted to a good story. Whatever you're in the mood for, we've got it. So pull up a chair, get comfortable, and welcome to your new addiction. This is Story Junkie, and trust me, you're going to want to stay. My husband, Jack Lambert, was not a man who made speeches. He didn't celebrate at ribbon cuttings or give interviews to business journals. He didn't hang his accolades on the wall or bring them up at dinner parties. He simply worked quietly, relentlessly, with the kind of focused discipline that most people admire from a distance, but very few actually possess. He built Lambert Industries from a single supply chain consulting contract into a multi-regional logistics empire with over 400 employees, 3 warehouses, and contracts with some of the largest manufacturing firms on the eastern seaboard. He was 68 years old when he died. It was a Saturday in October, the kind of afternoon where the air smells like wood smoke and the light falls at that low golden angle that makes everything look a little too beautiful to be real. Jack had been after those gutters for weeks. I'd told him to hire someone. We could more than afford it. But that wasn't Jack. He wasn't built for delegating the things he could still do with his own 2 hands. "I'm not an old man yet, Moraine," he'd said, and laughed at his own stubbornness the way he always did, eyes crinkling at the corners. I was inside making coffee when I heard the ladder scrape, then a sound I will never be able to describe adequately, a single awful crack, like something irreplaceable breaking all at once. By the time I reached him, Jack was lying on the flagstone path, the back of his head against the garden rock that had been there since we bought the house 31 years ago. He looked peaceful in a way that didn't make sense. He looked like a man who had simply decided to lie down in the yard and rest. He was gone before the ambulance arrived. The grief that followed was the kind that doesn't announce itself dramatically. It didn't come in waves, it came in the silences. The empty chair at the breakfast table, the side of the closet still holding his shirts in that exact order he insisted upon, the weight of a house that had always been full of purpose and now simply echoed. I was 67 years old. I had been married to Jack Lambert for 42 years, and I didn't know how to be a person who wasn't his wife. But I was also, as his will made very plain, the sole inheritor of everything he had built. Lambert Industries, the investment accounts, the real estate holdings, the 7-bedroom house in Fairview Heights where we had raised our son and grown old together, the lake cottage in Ashford, all of it, valued at the time of Jack's death at just under $18 million, passed to me, Moraine Adele Lambert, without condition and without reservation. Jack had trusted me completely. He always had. I would spend the next 2 years learning, in the most painful way imaginable, that not everyone in my life deserved the same trust. Cruz Lambert came into the world on a Thursday morning in late April, and from his very first hours he was beautiful in that slightly dangerous way that some children are. The kind of beauty that makes people want to give him things simply to keep looking at him. He was sharp, too. Quick with numbers as a boy, quick with words, quick to charm whoever was in the room. Teachers adored him, coaches wanted him on their teams. When he walked into a space, something shifted slightly. The air organized itself around him. Jack used to say, half proud and half worried, that Cruz had a gift for making people believe in him. The problem was that Cruz had spent most of his adult life believing in himself without ever doing the work that belief requires. His first startup, a tech-adjacent platform he launched at 32, collapsed inside 18 months, taking $140,000 of investor money with it. The second was a fitness app he described at family dinners with the breathless certainty of someone who has never actually shipped a product. It launched, limped, and quietly died. The third was a luxury travel concierge company that existed almost entirely as a website and a business card before the money ran out. The fourth, I can barely bring myself to describe it, was a cryptocurrency exchange that cost him, and several people he had convinced to invest, significant sums before regulators in 2 states began asking questions. 42 years old, and Cruz Lambert had 4 spectacular failures and no income to show for his decade of entrepreneurship. But the failures were only half of it. I didn't know until much later the full shape of what my son had become. I knew he had gambling problems. I had suspected it for years, seen the tells in the way he talked about money with the particular vagueness of someone managing several lies at once. I knew he had borrowed from Jack twice in the last years of Jack's life, amounts that Jack mentioned to me only obliquely, and that I had not pushed on because I was still at that point operating under the comfortable delusion that a mother can protect her child from his own nature by simply not looking directly at it. What I didn't know was the loan sharks. I didn't know about the two men who had, according to a private investigator I would hire much later, visited Cruz's apartment building twice in the 3 months before Jack died. I didn't know about the $93,000 he owed to a network of private lenders who were not the kind of people who sent polite letters. I didn't know any of that when Jack was alive, and I didn't know it in the first weeks after Jack's death, when Cruz showed up at the house in Fairview Heights wearing the face of a grieving son and sat across from me at the kitchen table holding my hands and telling me how much he loved me, how worried he was about me, how he wanted to be here for me through all of this. I believed him. I was his mother. Of course I believed him. Brooke Ward Lambert was 38 years old, and she was, without question, one of the most put-together women I had ever encountered. I mean that in the most complicated possible way. She was tall, with dark hair she wore in one of those effortless styles that actually take considerable effort, and she had a way of moving through rooms that made you feel like you were watching someone perform a role they had studied. She was charming without being warm. She was attentive without being kind. She laughed at precisely the right moments and asked questions that were just personal enough to make you feel seen without actually revealing anything about herself. Cruz had met her at a conference, one of those networking events he used to attend with the hopeful energy of a man who believes that the right room can substitute for the right preparation. They had been together 4 years, married for 2. I had never entirely warmed to Brooke, and I had never been able to articulate why, which troubled me, because I am not a woman who distrusts people without reason. Looking back, I understand now what I was sensing. Brooke was a con woman, not in the amateur sense, and not someone who told small lies to smooth social situations. She was a professional, a careful, strategic patient operator who had spent years cultivating the art of identifying what people wanted to believe and giving them just enough of it to lower their guard. She had, I would eventually learn, been previously married twice. The first husband had lost a significant portion of his savings in a business deal she had quietly orchestrated and then distanced herself from before the collapse. The second had discovered, after their divorce, that she had redirected 18 months of joint account deposits into a separate account in her maiden name before filing for dissolution. She had never been charged with anything. She was too careful for that. She operated in the margins of what could be proven, always maintaining plausible deniability, always making sure that on paper, everything had technically been her partner's idea, which is, of course, exactly what she was doing with Cruz. The plan, and there was a plan, meticulously constructed, was to have Cruz declared his mother's legal guardian on the grounds that she was mentally incapacitated and unable to manage her own finances. With guardianship in place, Cruz would control the Lambert estate. All of it. Brooke would help him execute it. She would be the supportive wife, the organized one, the one who kept records and arranged appointments, and slowly, carefully built the paper case that an incompetent mother required a son's supervision, and then, once the estate was secured, Brooke would disappear with as much of it as she could carry. Cruz didn't know that last part. He thought they were partners. He had no idea that he was himself the mark. It started 6 months after Jack died, and it started slowly enough that I almost didn't notice. Cruz began calling more frequently. This, on its own, seemed like grief. My son reaching out, leaning in, being present in a way he hadn't always been. He offered to help with the finances, said he was worried the estate was too complex for me to manage alone. I told him I was managing fine. I had always been involved in Lambert Industries' finances. Jack and I had always made decisions together. I was not the helpless widow Cruz seemed to be imagining, but he persisted. He began showing up at the house on weekdays, just to check in. Brooke started coming with him, bringing meals she claimed to have cooked herself. I later noticed the restaurant stickers still on the containers, and sitting beside me on the couch with that careful attentiveness, asking me how I was sleeping, whether I'd been feeling forgetful, whether the house felt like too much to manage. The questions were gentle, they were kind. They were also, I now understand, the beginning of a script. I noticed a slight pattern. When I forgot something small like an appointment I'd rescheduled, a name I'd blanked on in conversation, the ordinary forgettable moments that happened to everyone over 60, Cruz would go very still and exchange a look with Brooke. Just a flicker, but I saw it. I am 69 years old. I am not senile, and I've been reading people my entire adult life. The day I found the brochure was the day something in me went cold and very, very quiet. I was looking for an envelope in Cruz's jacket. He'd left it on the coat hook and asked me to find his car keys, and tucked into the inside pocket was a trifold brochure from a law firm, Hargrove and Pelham, elder law specialists. The brochure was open to a page about guardianship proceedings. 3 sentences had been underlined in pencil. I put the brochure back exactly where I found it. I gave Cruz his keys. I made us all tea, and I listened to them talk about my well-being with the attentiveness of a woman who was already planning her counterattack. I had known Margaret O'Say since we were both young women trying to navigate careers in a city that didn't make it easy. She had gone into law. I had gone into business alongside Jack. We had stayed friends across 4 decades, the kind of friendship that doesn't require constant contact because its roots run deep enough to survive long stretches of silence. I called her on a Tuesday morning, 2 days after I found the brochure. I told her everything. I told her about the questions, the looks, the visits, the underlined sentences. Margaret listened without interrupting. Then she said, in that precise, unhurried way she has, "Moraine, what you're describing has a name. It's called elder financial abuse, and it is far more common than most people realize, and it very often comes from within the family." She also said, "You need a private investigator. Today, not tomorrow." Margaret referred me to a man named Desmond Ford. He was 63, former law enforcement, and had the demeanor of someone who had seen every variety of human treachery and had long since stopped being surprised by any of it. He was also crucially discreet. Margaret trusted him, and Margaret didn't trust easily. I met Desmond at a coffee shop across town. I didn't want anyone to see his car in my driveway, and I told him what I'd found and what I suspected. He asked me 3 questions. He wrote nothing down while I spoke. When I finished, he folded his hands on the table and said, "Mrs. Lambert, if your son is pursuing guardianship proceedings, there will be a paper trail. Give me 6 weeks." He needed 4. What Desmond Ford assembled over those 4 weeks was the kind of file that makes your hands go numb when you hold it. Cruz had already consulted with Hargrove and Pelham twice. The firm specialized in what was euphemistically called contested competency cases, which meant, in plain language, that they helped families legally strip aging relatives of financial autonomy. The partner Cruz had met with, a man named Gerald Pelham, had a reputation in elder law circles that was, at best, ethically ambiguous. Cruz had submitted to the firm what he called a preliminary summary of observed cognitive decline. It was a 7-page document describing me. It cited my grief as evidence of emotional instability. It cited a car accident I'd been in 18 months ago, a minor fender bender in a parking lot, fully documented, not my fault, as evidence of impaired judgment. It cited the fact that I had changed the locks on the lake cottage after Jack died, a completely reasonable security measure, as evidence of paranoid behavior. Every incident was real, every interpretation was a lie. More than that, Desmond had found something else entirely, something that cracked the situation open in a direction I hadn't anticipated. Brooke, it turned out, had her own private attorney, not the firm she and Cruz had been consulting together. A separate attorney, engaged 4 months earlier, handling what appeared to be the preparation of a limited power of attorney document, one that would give Brooke sole signatory authority over a new financial account she had opened quietly in both her name and Cruz's, but structured in a way that Cruz could not access independently. Brooke wasn't just helping Cruz steal from me, she was also building the machinery to steal from Cruz once the stealing from me was done. I sat with that document for a long time. I was looking at a woman who had studied my son, identified his debts and his desperation and his particular flavor of arrogance, and decided he was useful right up until the moment he wouldn't be. I thought about Jack. I thought about what he had built, and for whom he had built it, and what kind of woman I intended to be in the face of what was being done to his memory. And then I called Margaret Osey back and told her we needed to move. I want to be clear about something. I didn't want revenge in the way that word is usually understood. I didn't want to humiliate my son in public or destroy him out of spite. He was still my son. That is a fact that grief and betrayal cannot fully dissolve, no matter how much you might want them to. What I wanted was justice. I wanted the truth documented and the fraud stopped. I wanted to protect what Jack had spent his life building, and yes, I will be honest, because I think honesty is the only thing worth offering anyone. I wanted Cruz and Brooke to understand with absolute clarity that they had profoundly miscalculated. Margaret and I spent 2 weeks in her conference room with Desmond's file spread across the table, building our response. We engaged a second attorney, a litigator named Hazel Ibarra, who specialized in financial fraud and elder abuse cases and who had, according to Margaret, never lost a guardianship defense in 14 years of practice. Hazel reviewed everything. She reviewed the competency summary Cruz had filed with Hargrove and Pelham. She reviewed Brooke's private attorney filings. She reviewed Desmond's surveillance notes. She reviewed the financial records I had quietly pulled from Lambert Industries, which showed that Cruz had, in the preceding 8 months, submitted 2 separate expense reimbursement requests to the company, requests that the current board members had approved without checking with me, because they had assumed, incorrectly, that I was aware of them. The total, $41,000, billed as consulting fees for work Cruz had never actually performed. $41,000 from his father's company while his father's body was still relatively recently in the ground. Hazel said, "We can pursue criminal charges, civil charges, or both. We can also go the quiet route, stop the guardianship proceeding before it's ever formally filed, recover the fraudulent billing, and let the threat of prosecution be the leverage. What do you want, Moraine?" I thought about that for a long time. I told her I wanted all of it documented. Every piece of paper, every timeline, every transaction. I wanted it airtight and irrefutable, and then I wanted a meeting with my son, just Cruz, not Brooke, before anything else moved. Cruz arrived at the house on a Wednesday evening, and I had told him only that I needed to speak with him about some estate matters, which was true enough. He came alone, as I'd asked. He was wearing a jacket that was slightly too new for his situation, the kind of purchase a man makes when he's trying to look like he has more money than he does. He sat across from me at the dining room table where we had eaten every Christmas dinner for 40 years. I had a folder in front of me, closed. I offered him coffee, then we talked about nothing for a few minutes, the weather, a mutual acquaintance's recent health scare, and then I opened the folder. I didn't speak, I simply began sliding documents across the table one by one and letting him read them. The first was a copy of the competency summary he had filed with Hargrove and Pelham. His name was on it, his handwriting was in the margins. He went still in a way I had never seen him go still before. Not the stillness of a man thinking, the stillness of a man whose body understands, before his mind catches up, that something catastrophic has happened. "Mom," he started. I slid the next document, the fraudulent expense reports from Lambert Industries, the next. Desmond's surveillance notes from the consultations with Gerald Pelham, the record of Brooke's private attorney engagement, and the account she had structured without his knowledge. I let him read that one twice. The color left his face, not all at once, gradually, like water draining from a tub. "She's planning to leave you," I said. It was the first thing I had said since we sat down. Once guardianship over me was granted and money started moving, she was going to take whatever she could access and walk. "You were never the partner, Cruz. You were the instrument." He didn't say anything for a very long time. When he finally looked up at me, he looked not like my 42-year-old son with 4 failed businesses and debts I couldn't fully account for. He looked like the boy he had been at 8 years old when he did something wrong and couldn't quite carry the weight of it. "I owe people money," he said. "Bad people, Mum. I didn't know what else to—" "I know about the loan sharks," I said quietly. "Desmond found them too." That broke something open in him. He put his head in his hands, and I sat across the table and watched my son cry. I didn't reach out to touch him, and I didn't tell him it was going to be all right, because I didn't yet know if it was. When he had finished, I told him what was going to happen. I didn't press criminal charges against my son. I'm not a saint and I'm not naive. I chose not to pursue criminal charges against Cruz because Hazel Ibarra advised me that it would be a lengthy, expensive, and very public process that would expose the Lambert estate to scrutiny and litigation for potentially years. But I also chose it because he was my son, and because when I looked at him across that table, I saw someone who had been catastrophically weak, not irredeemably evil, and I was not certain I was entitled to make that distinction for a judge and jury. What I did press, with the full force of Hazel Ibarra's considerable legal arsenal, was everything else. Cruz signed a formal agreement, witnessed, notarized, and filed with the court, in which he acknowledged the fraudulent expense billing and committed to repayment of the $41,000 through a structured deduction from his future inheritance should one ever materialize. He agreed to withdraw any and all engagement with Hargrove and Pelham and to never again initiate any guardianship, conservatorship, or competency proceeding related to me without independent psychiatric evaluation and court order. He agreed to participate in mandatory financial counseling. He agreed to a no-contact provision with the Lambert Industries Board that required any future business interactions to go through me directly. The loan sharks were a separate matter. Hazel connected Cruz with a debt resolution attorney who negotiated a structured payoff arrangement, amounts I will not specify, but which were not inconsiderable, funded by a private loan from the Lambert estate that Cruz would repay over 7 years at modest interest. I was not doing this for Cruz. I was doing it because the alternative was my son being hurt by people who didn't share my complicated feelings about him. Brooke was a different calculation entirely. Brooke didn't know until it was already done that any of this was in motion. She had, in the weeks since Cruz's meeting with me, noticed that he was quieter, more withdrawn. She had attributed this to stress. She had continued corresponding with her private attorney. She had, according to Desmond, who was still watching, made a reservation at an upscale hotel under her maiden name for a weekend 2 months out. She had begun liquidating a small investment account. She was already planning her departure. What she received on a Thursday morning was a hand-delivered letter from Hazel Ibarra's firm. It outlined, in the precise language of someone who has left no interpretive wiggle room whatsoever, the following: that her private account structuring had been documented and reported to the relevant financial regulators, that her prior marital fraud history had been compiled and was available to the appropriate authorities, that Hargrove and Pelham had been notified of her role in the competency filing, and that Lambert Industries was pursuing the recovery of legal costs and damages through civil suit, unless Brooke agreed to the following terms. The terms were simple. She would sign divorce papers, which Cruz had agreed to file, without contesting any marital asset division. She would surrender the jointly held account she had structured. She would sign a legally binding confidentiality agreement, and she would never, as long as she lived, engage in any financial, legal, or personal dealings with Maureen Lambert, Cruz Lambert, Lambert Industries, or any entity connected thereto. She would walk away with her car, her personal belongings, and a sum I will describe only as substantially less than she had anticipated. Brooke Ward Lambert signed those papers in under 48 hours. I was told she didn't look surprised. I was told she looked above everything else like a woman who had been beaten at her own game and knew it and respected it. I believe that. It is the one thing about Brooke that I can say without ambiguity. She knew how this worked, and when it worked against her, she didn't pretend it hadn't. I want to tell you that Cruz and I rebuilt everything immediately, that we sat across from each other and cried and forgave, and the credits rolled over a restored relationship and a lesson learned. That would be a satisfying story. The truth is messier and quieter, and I think more honest. Cruz and I talk. We have dinner once a month. It is not the dinner we had before all of this. Nothing could be that, because the before time has a layer of unknowing in it that I no longer possess. I see my son clearly now. All of him, the charm and the weakness, the intelligence squandered on shortcuts, the grief he has never really processed about his father, the shame he carries about what he tried to do, which he has never directly named to me, but which sits between us at every table we share. I don't pretend the shame isn't there. I also don't use it as a weapon. He is my son, and Jack loved him, and I intend to hold both of those things without letting either one destroy the other. The financial counseling has helped him, I think. He has a job now, a genuine one, working in operations for a logistics firm that is not Lambert Industries, where he can't trade on the family name and can't charm his way through performance reviews. He shows up every day. That's more than he was doing 2 years ago. Lambert Industries is in the hands of a professional CEO I selected with the help of the board, and it is being run competently, which is all Jack ever asked of anyone. I change the locks again. My home is mine, my life is mine, my name is mine, and I am fully, entirely capable of managing all of it. Desmond Ford sent me a final invoice 2 months after everything concluded, and tucked into the envelope was a single index card with a sentence he'd apparently taken to giving his clients when cases like mine wrapped up. It read, "The people who believe you are most vulnerable are counting on you to agree with them." I have thought about that sentence every day since. I was never confused, I was never incompetent, I was never too old or too bereaved or too female to manage $18 million and a logistics company and a 7-bedroom house. I was grieving, which is a different thing entirely, and people who love you will sit with your grief, and people who want something from you will try to use it. The difference between those two kinds of people is worth learning to see. It is worth looking for. It is worth sometimes hiring someone to help you see it clearly if your own eyes have been clouded by love and history and the particular blindness that family can induce. Elder financial abuse is not a thing that happens to other people. It's not limited to people who are actually confused or diminished. It happens to sharp, capable people, people who have spent their entire lives managing things well. It happens because the perpetrators are often people those victims trust more than anyone. People who have been given access, who know the shape of the family, who understand what questions won't be asked. If you are caring for an aging parent, I am asking you to be honest with yourself about your motivations, not because most people are predatory, they aren't, but because the line between I want to help and I want to benefit can blur in ways that are easy to rationalize and very hard to take back. If you are an aging parent, I am asking you to trust the signals your body sends when something feels wrong, even when the person making you feel wrong is someone you raised and fed and loved for decades. Your instincts didn't retire when you did. And if you are anyone at all, document everything, keep your own records, maintain relationships outside your immediate family, friends, attorneys, advisors who owe their loyalty to you and not to the people around you. Know what you own and how it works and what would happen to it if you were gone. If you made it this far, you already know you're a story junkie. Hit like, subscribe, turn on notifications, and let's feed that addiction together. A new story is always waiting for you here. Jack Lambert spent his life building something. He trusted me to protect it because he knew, in a way that my son forgot and my daughter-in-law never understood, that I was the strongest person in that family. He was right. He was always right. This story is dedicated to every woman who has been underestimated by people who should have known better.